becomes increasingly automated, as control systems become more autonomous, as processes plug into ever larger networks, as business becomes more reliant on data, how do we ensure the security of our industrial processes, and how do we ensure the safety of the people who work within those processes? These are the issues that we will discuss. We will look at some emerging trends and policy implications, and we will do it in the presence of our panel: Andrei Suvorov, Dr. David Leal, Philip Rice, and Wang Yusheng. If I could invite the four of them to join me on the stage, and if you could please give them a round of applause to make them welcome, please. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us for this discussion. I'm Declan Curry. I'm your moderator for this session. Some introductions to our panelists. Andrei Suvorov is the Chief Executive of Adaptive Production Technology. That's a Kaspersky joint venture. You will note that he is not the name in your program, and we are grateful to him for standing in at the last moment. Dr. David Leal is a Senior Policy Analyst at the Cambridge Institute for Manufacturing at the University of Cambridge. Philip Rice is the Managing Director of Lloyd's Register Foundation, and Wang Yusheng is Vice President for the Wuhan Huazhong Numerical Control Company. Welcome to all of you. We also offer apologies from Sergio Emidiobbini of the Friuli Venezia region, who has been unable to join the discussion. And whilst we are continuing to discuss an always connected world, if I could please ask our panelists to resist the urge to use their mobile telephones during this discussion, and if I could please remind all of you to switch your mobile phones to the silent mode. Thank you very much. So the brief for this discussion is to showcase the latest thinking on safety, by which we mean the safety of humans in the workplace, as well as security issues such as cybersecurity, data protection, and resilience. We will identify different examples of risks, and we will consider new global and national standards as a framework to boost productivity, to reduce our environmental impact, and to develop truly sustainable industries in harmony with nature. David, why did you start us off? When we look at this world of more connected machines, more automation, the greater use of data, what are the drivers for Industry 4.0? What is setting the pace of change?
Thank you. Well, in terms of safety and security, I mean, we have all heard about these technologies, the Internet of Things, cloud computing, big data, collaborative robots, artificial intelligence, etc., and so on. Really, the expectation is on one side, on the cybersecurity side, and maybe some of my colleagues will be able to add to that later, is that the expectation is that we're going to have more systems, more components connected and sharing data, time-critical data between them. Particularly for the manufacturing sector, this can be for traditional information technologies, but also in manufacturing, what is peculiar about manufacturing is the operational technologies, so industrial control systems, and so on. And this opens the door for cybersecurity attacks that can target those vulnerabilities in operational technologies. You're going to have big volumes of data that we haven't seen before. And operational technologies really traditionally have not been very focused on or thinking on cybersecurity. So that's on one side. On the other side, in terms of safety, really the expectation is that all these technologies will introduce new ways of working. And in particular, there will be more intensive interaction between humans and machines. Also, the expectation is that manufacturing processes and factories will be more reconfigurable, more dynamic, And it becomes harder and harder to assess the risk factors in these reconfigurations, in these new ways of working. We need to be able not only to design things for safety, but we need to be able to certify that things are safe, and we need to be able to, once things are in place, we can monitor risks better and manage risks when they happen.
And Philip, this is an important point, that this is relevant. We are having this discussion today because this is happening in more and more businesses. We are seeing the greater introduction of digital technology, the greater integration of digital with manufacturing processes, all the way along the supply chain, all the way up and down in terms of vertical integration and throughout the life cycle of the product or service.
Correct. So, I think just as a sort of starting point, the International Labour Organization estimates that 3.9% of GDP is lost every year to issues relating to workplace health and safety. And so within that context, and within the context of the changing 4.0 environment, what we have to consider is how can that be used for good? So there are a number of organizations that are looking at how you use wearable technology, visual analytics, all sorts of 4.0 technologies to try and improve health and safety in the workplace. But we also need to recognize that it introduces a risk. And we are only at the beginning of starting to understand how to deal with that risk and how that risk is different from the risks that industry has faced in the past.
And this is relevant to you because of Lloyd's Register and what it does and its background over many centuries of identifying risk, quantifying risk, and
Correct.
minimizing risk.
Correct. So Lloyd's Register is an independent verifier and certifier of standards, be those quality standards or health and safety standards. And so our role in industry, and the organization is 260 years old, and actually started in the first industrial revolution, has been to look at the impact of how do we keep people safe in the industrial workplace.
And in this context, that is being done looking at new ways of organizing work, new processes within industry.
Correct. And I think what is safe to say at the moment is, if we look at the actors in industry, so if we look at how the standards organizations are responding, how the research organizations are responding, and in fact how operators are responding, they're all in a position at the moment where they are kind of playing catch up, if I'm honest, and so it will take time to establish these standards. The risk for industry and for the adoption of Internet or Industrial Revolution 4.0 is that things get delayed by this lack of standards, this lack of understanding of application, and just overall a lack of the pace of establishing those.
Thank you. We'll pick up some of those points and develop them later in our discussion. But when we talk about the drivers of change in industry and what that is doing on the factory floor, I'm very pleased that Wang Yusong is with us, as your company, sir, is a great example of how interconnected digital industry is changing. Describe for us, please, your company and the work that it does.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. That's fine. 感谢主持人，这个给我这样的一个机会哈。首先，我想，应该先介绍一下，简要的介绍一下我们华中数控股份有限公司。因为如果我要不去介绍它的话，可能我们在座的各位没有听说过它，不知道这个公司它是做什么的哈。所以呢，给我。
We need to know what any specific organization is doing. So I can give you an example of our company. I work for Wuhan Honzhong Numerical Control. We develop and build high-tech equipment for measuring things. We work with Siemens and other Western corporations. I would like to tell you about our company and share some of my thoughts. In the city of Wuhan, we have an organization that has been incorporated in 1994. We had very strong links with the local university. Our manager, the founder of the company, was a minister of education in People's Republic of China. Our university is one of the leading centers that develops digital control systems. Every year, we develop about 20,000 different devices that are digitally controlled. This is a very big manufacturing company. We do a lot in the way of mobility. Internet of Things is another area where we're very active. These technologies grow and develop rapidly. What is different about our company is that we keep a close eye on the level of training of our employees. We have great hopes for artificial intelligence. We look into new manufacturing technologies. Smart manufacturing is a big thing for us. And we use several different technologies and approaches at the same time. Smart manufacturing includes 4 things for us. We focus on continuous improvement. We focus on training, on decision-making, and implementation of the decisions made by the management. This makes us a strong business. We make numerically controlled tools, and we are one of the oldest companies in China. We started specializing in this field earlier than most of other people. We produce machine tools of new generation. We design our machinery. We use the latest and greatest software for the design work. It is very different from what people used in the past. We work more efficiently, more reliably. We have good opportunities for collaboration between our workers, and we use materials better. So that's what we're doing essentially.
David is a wonderful example of some of the wonderful example of some of the processes of change, the drive of change that you were describing in your opening remarks. This is Mr. Wang's industry is exactly the type of industry that needs to consider the issues that we are discussing here today. One of China's oldest businesses, he said, yet one that is at the cutting edge of technological innovation.
Absolutely. Even before the panel, I was talking to Mr. Wang about how they're trying to use real-time numerical control, machining, milling, etc. And I remember when I was in university, back in the day, I'm not going to say the date, but we were trying to think about how could we ever do real-time quality control in machining. And it's fantastic to see that we have arrived to a time when the technological advances actually allow companies like Mr. Wang's company to work on this. And this can actually have a great impact in terms for manufacturers. You know, you can reduce waste, reduce energy consumption, and so on. So really, from the factory floor perspective, is really quite a contribution.
Mr. Suvorov, this is an interesting discussion for you also, because when we talk about progress in this area, it is not just the tasks of the machines themselves, it is the software that controls them, and it is the data that informs their actions. And these are an important part of any discussion about safety and security, is securing the data that drives digital business.
Yes. For the topic, which I would like to share with you from the perspective of the company who has been specializing for cybersecurity for the last 22 years. I represent at the same time today a new generation of engineering companies. This is a joint venture of Kaspersky Lab and industrial company Itelma, which we created 1 year ago to bring to the market of industrial Internet of Things new quality for cybersecurity. I am proud to be here because this is my second GMIS. 2 years ago, I was invited to Abu Dhabi and had a good speech with the professionals about the topic of cybersecurity. And for me, it's a good sign that we speak more often, not about cybersecurity and cyber incidents, but we use term cyber risk, which means that we should understand that it's not anymore about particular task for our IT people or IT security guys. This is definitely should be within agenda of the board. One anonymous button push can lead to the incident, which can cost to the company some volumes of money, which is comparable with the profit. So we had a huge collection, you know, very sound public cases when some epidemic or cyber attack can lead to the losses. And it's not only about intentional cyber attack. With all type of connections and complexity, it can be even a result of some system upgrade, or it can be a result of people within the company who are trying to arrange some fraud exercise. So all of this can lead to real business losses, and this is imperative to discuss it on the high level, not only on the level of technology. Because we see it as a...
May I just interrupt? Mr. Wang, do you agree this is so important, it is a matter for the board, for the boardroom? Let me ask again, do you agree with Mr. Suvov said?
是的，我非常同意这个安德烈这个看法。现在这个万物互联这个时代，我们第4代工业革命这个到来。
I totally agree with this point of view, because in the Industry 4.0 time and the IoT time and era, no sound.
Thank you so much. Mr. Savarov, let me bring you back in then to help us identify the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities in business as you see them today. David and Philip have both talked about larger networks within businesses, that you have processes that are interconnected in a way that was much greater than before. That creates a greater vulnerability to cyber risk.
Yes, completely agree. One more topic I would like to emphasize, that in comparison with IT world, manufacturing landscape have a much more standards and approaches. So we see many respectful vendors who are trying to present their architectures on the level of industrial control systems. First statement, they are not the same as on IT level. They use a different standards and protocols, so Modbus, S7, etc., which are not compatible with the level of enterprise architecture. And second, it should be noted that in case of digital industrialization, we deal with pneumatic, electric, and hydraulic. So any incident can lead to serious machinery breakdown or unplanned outage. This all leads to necessity to discuss specific of cybersecurity mechanism and solutions which cannot be applied from traditional IT world. So we should follow from threat model on particular production, on particular story. For example, here during these days, we present our industrial gateway, which provide secure connection from CNC machine up to industrial Internet of Things platform with a much more secure level to connect between OPC industrial standard, which cannot be applied with traditional IT products, to traditional analytical platform. So this is one of the examples.
And Philip, this speaks to your point about the need for better, higher common standards, which is something that perhaps we might return to later in the discussion, but it's worth making that observation now.
Absolutely. So I think we are still very much in the stage of agreeing on which standards should be used. And it's worth noting that if you take lessons from history in terms of the introduction of new technologies, it's very unfortunate that it's often a catastrophe of some sort that leads to people sitting down and having that discussion and that debate about how do we get better standards, how do we get better interoperability, and make sure that we're not going to experience that type of thing again. And
whereas it would actually be more cost effective if preventative measures were taken before.
Exactly, and you've seen that through the advent of steam power and the introduction of boilers. You've seen that in the 1930s with disasters that happened for the likes of BASF. In fact, I would even touch on it to say that we're seeing some of the considerations around this in what Boeing is suffering from at the moment as well. So the question then is, what can we be doing now to avoid any of those types of catastrophic loss situations? And just to add to what my colleague has said, I think the main concern that we have is while financial and data loss is one of the concerns, the element that he touched on is that we're seeing this blurring of information technology and operations technology, where actually there can be harm to life and property. And that's the area that we should be most concerned about ultimately.
There is more to say about cybersecurity, and we will return to that presently. But Dr. Dahl, I wonder if, certainly in the media, there is more coverage of cyber attack, of cyber crime, and rather less attention paid to some of the other risks and factors which are identified by the working group in the report that the group has published, some of the human factors. I wonder if perhaps safety is simply less sexy than cybersecurity.
I think that's absolutely correct. It is less sexy, but not least important. As my colleagues have been explaining, really the issue here is not only new technologies pose new emerging safety risks in IC, but also cybersecurity and safety are merging. So the introduction of cyber physical systems opened the door for cyber attacks, as they were saying, to lead to physical asset damage or injuries, physical injuries of people. And as they were talking about losses, this report that I have here that you might be able to find outside of the hall has a nice taxonomy of potential risks for manufacturers. And as Andre was saying, this can be the cost of these losses, either financial or because of third-party liabilities, or because it actually happened, led to an accident. It can be quite high. And the other point is, this is a reality. This is something that is happening now. This is not something in the future. This is something that is really going on right now. In the UK, for example, just to finish, there has been recently a survey on cybersecurity concerns of manufacturers. About half of them said that they have already experienced cybersecurity issues. And in terms of safety, there's just a need to raise awareness and to do more foresight exercises to really understand what the implications are. At the moment, these are not very well understood.
Well, let's look at some of the safety risks that you have identified in the working group, and some of the physical risks, first of all. We have mechanical, the risk of mechanical damage, electrical, thermal, the whole issue of if you have more robots and autonomous robots perhaps moving around a factory floor, that increases the physical risk.
Absolutely. And so now with autonomous vehicles in the factory, it's not only that there are new unknown risks, but it becomes very difficult to assure safety of these systems. At the moment, there are not really standardized methodologies, regulations about how to do this. And it's part of the work that Lloyd's Register Foundation is sponsoring. For example, there's a project that I know they are doing in York University on the safety assurance of autonomous systems, which is very critical and important. So, yeah.
Yeah, but Philip Rice from Lloyd's Register, physical risk on the factory floor has existed for as long as factories have existed. Your challenge is predicting how much greater the risk is in an autonomous environment, how to quantify it, how to mitigate it.
Correct. So I think one of the ways, and the research that has been done that David was referring to, draws this distinction is if you look at the health and safety aspects. So there is a health aspect in terms of psychosocial well-being and kind of long-term health effects of working in an environment where you are either working with autonomous systems or cobots, but then there's also a safety aspect to that, and the safety aspect is obviously a much more immediate and a much more obvious area to focus on. But those are the sort of two the two areas to consider. And what we see is that while there is a lot of activity from the different actors who are concerned about safety and security, it's still not being coordinated. So we have some reference in ISO standards, for example. So there's ISO 10218 and ISO 15066, which do make reference to to the use of robotic systems and cobots, but it's not been integrated as a whole, and what we're seeing is there are a range of sort of national initiatives at the moment that probably need better coordination and need to be brought together. And I think the hope is that forums like GMIS provide the impetus for that to start to be put on the agenda.
David.
Yeah, just to add to that, to my previous answer, when we speak about safety risk, something that is really overlooked and not talked a lot about has to do with psychological and psychosocial risks of workers in new Industry 4.0 environments, let's say it. There are concerns that the use of all these new technologies could lead to more stress in the workforce from oversight, excessive oversight. You know, there will be pressure about performance of workers. And that is something that is really not studied very well at the moment, and that we need to put attention into that, because it is just as important.
You mean additional stress from controlling the robots, from managing, supervising the processes, or you mean the potential for more automated surveillance of individual employees and what they are doing in the factory?
Both things, really. And it's also the fact that there's new ways of working that people might not necessarily be ready for. Work will be more individual, less social. So this is something that is really not mentioned a lot. People tend to focus on physical risk, mechanical risk, electrical hazards, etc., etc. But I think this is something that we need to pay attention right now.
Mr. Wang, as our distinguished and esteemed industrialist, I would be interested in your perspective on this discussion about physical safety.
Well, I do represent an industrial facility. I am an industrialist, and speaking about cybersecurity, speaking about defense against risks, I would like to say that this is something that is definitely on our agenda. And this is not just an issue for producers, for manufacturers. This is a matter for a national strategy. This is an international level problem or challenge. Over these 2 days at the GMIS summit, this is something that is talked a lot about. And I mean, this time that we live in, within Industrial Revolution 4.0, you know, we've been talking about this incessantly for the last 2 days, and we, facilities, we have our own observations that we can share. We, at our association back in 2016, we created a union for standardization, for standardizing various processes that deal with using numerically controlled tools in our production. And there are a lot of clauses there. What should be checked at inputs? What do I mean by this? That's when we talk to our customers, those who order things from us. At this point, we need to start talking about digital security. And this union of likely facilities is something that gives those facilities a permission and authorization to be involved in particular activities. This involves a whole hierarchy of various steps. We have been really involved in this on the national level, on the government, on the state level. What has been done is this. We have this law on cybersecurity since June. This is a national level law. This is something that covers the entire country. And as for our specific company, I'd like to say that we too study the international experience quite diligently. And I believe that I would be proud to tell everyone that last month, on June the 27th, I participated in an intergovernmental fourth subcommission that prepares the regular meetings of the prime ministers of Russia and China. And at that meeting, we discussed the following, that maybe, together with our colleagues from Russia, we could reach certain agreements on working towards some common standards in the manufacturing area. I'm talking about safety issues at facilities that produce these types of machines and products. So we hope that we are going to be able to prepare the requisite personnel, people that would be able to prevent attacks from happening, prevents these risks from materializing. And I think this is something that we should begin with. And prior to this panel session, we had a discussion with Andre and Philip. We also reached out to the two universities present here. And I hope that what we're discussing today will serve as an impetus for us to move even further forward. We will strengthen these connections with the university and with the academic community, and of course with the industrialists in the area of industrial safety.
For that observation, and Philip, it seems everyone wants to talk about standards, and we will get to that stage, and also the idea of collaborative working on this. But Anders, if we could just pick up the thread that you had laid and that Mr. Wang elaborated on in his comments just now, the security risks that are identified, some in this report, but also from your own experience as someone who is responsible for these areas. What are we looking at? We're looking at a vulnerability of control of the manufacturing process itself.
Thank you for the question. I would like, first of all, to contribute the last comment and respect this opinion, because I see that the new time of industrial Internet of Things require ecosystem building. In the nearest future, even right now, we see that no one company can provide one solution for the modern plant. Moreover, many valuable services will be provided from cloud, covering suppliers, producers, and customers. And companies will win if they will accumulate the services in some ecosystem, which means that no one company can provide cybersecurity, another one just sensors, actuators, and other stuff. It should be definitely agreement. It should be alliance. It should be conclusion of standards and protocols. Regarding industrial topic, I would like to say that we in our team are on the way to meet all type of cybersecurity aspects for this new architecture of industrial Internet of Things platforms. One example, we are working on vulnerability monitor, which will bring a new quality of some weakness handling for non-computer elements. We all know and we all have some antivirus software on our laptops, but not all of us know that gateways, routers, video cameras, they don't look like computer, but they are computer. And we don't have vulnerability management for this type of devices with the same efficiency as we have for our IT stuff.
Yet for those who wish to cause us harm, they are points of entry. Those routers, they can be used.
This information is available, exploits are available, and our mission and our mutual obligation how to do it ahead of bad guys, ahead of incident which may happen based on this vulnerability. So it also requires coordination. So currently we work with the many vendors to accumulate vulnerabilities found and then to distribute these vulnerabilities in the way of standard packages. So customers who run IoT platform can understand, I use this PLC. This PLC just got new one vulnerability from June 2019, and these are recommendations how to handle it very quickly. So it will bring more resilience, it will bring more efficiency in the way how to fix vulnerabilities found.
Is there a greater risk because more data is being processed? Because companies are dealing with more data, because they're gathering more information about their customers, because they are using more data to drive more processes? Is it simply that increase in volume that is generating increased risk?
Not because of volume itself, but because of decisions which may be taken based on this information. So currently, based on World Economic Forum, about 80% of physical assets still are not connected. So which means that if we will be able to connect them in the nearest future, we can get a new value for our business. One example, in Europe we have a company which sell currently not engines, so they produce engines, but they do not sell engines anymore. They sell a service with the name rotation as a service. So they calculate number of rotations and provide billing based on this type of effective, valuable service of their products. But it requires absolute transparency between customer environment and the plant who produce engines. Because if you have a data confusion, you will not handle this process in a proper way. So transparency also part of cybersecurity story, because it's about money and it's about financial transaction. So you have to be 100% confident that data which are generating on the level of customer are relevant, valid, and reliable.
David, is there enough recognition within traditional manufacturing industry of the strategic importance of data and the importance of preserving and protecting that data and the use of that data?
Well, I think with the advent of all these new technologies, there is more and more recognition that you can get a lot more out of your data. We have always had data from different systems, but most of the time with current and old systems, this data is not in the same format, it cannot communicate, you cannot compare it to another set of data set from another machine, etc. So there is an increasing interest in seeing how we can actually make sense of all this data and use it to improve our processes. But as Andrei was saying,
in terms of really understanding its value and therefore doing enough to protect that value.
Well, that's an issue, the awareness. If we think about manufacturing, we tend to think about really big companies, the Siemens, the GE, etc. The reality is that manufacturing, in the work that we do in Cambridge, we work for different governments around the world, and we get to talk to a lot of manufacturing companies of all sizes. The reality is that most of manufacturing is composed by small and medium enterprises. The small and medium enterprises are very focused on their day-to-day operations. They do not have any expertise most of the time on cybersecurity, and most of them don't even know what Industry 4.0 is. So awareness, not only of Industry 4.0, but then about safety, security issues, and the potential value of data that you can get out of these new technologies is quite low, I would say, for manufacturers.
So from where do they get that expertise? From where do they get that awareness? If they are so busy just running the business, who's going to help them?
Well, that's some of the part of the work that we do is we review national initiatives from different governments around the world that are aimed at doing exactly this. They try to help their manufacturing sectors to create awareness. This can be done either directly by government institutions or innovation academies, etc., engineering and scientific academies, etc. But the key is that usually government is the one that is intervening to create awareness campaigns. We see that in particular with cybersecurity, the UK is a good example, Japan, Singapore, they're very active on trying to communicate these to businesses. And actually, that's a topic that is also mentioned in the report. Again, if people want to have a look.
Wang Xusong, your reflections on the importance of data, the strategic importance of data, and whether companies really do appreciate it.
应该说，我们制造行业。
Yes, indeed. We are the industry people. We don't have 100% understanding. We are far away from that. In our field, where we produce numerically controlled tools, we have this alliance that I've been telling you about, and it does not include everyone. There are a lot of medium-sized companies that are still dormant. They have not suffered yet from cyber attacks. When it happens, when they have trouble, then they wake up to the problem and start dealing with it.
To them, of course. One way of protecting data is to become isolated, to isolate that data from others. But actually, there is great value from the sharing of data. We want to have security, but also release the tremendous value from sharing.
我认为，确实，刚才我也说过。
Like I said, we are witnessing the fourth industrial revolution. We cannot become isolated from the rest of the world. We cannot stand still as technical progress goes on. This would be dumb. How can we get protection from threats? Well, laws should help us. Governments should do more to take extra steps to protect us. We, at the level of our company, cannot fight hackers. Those people who want to implant malicious software in our systems. But this is something we talk about. We cannot even address this system at the level of a country as big as China. We have to all get together and fight the wrongdoers. Governments of all countries have to pay more attention to legislation, including international legislation, to counter such threats. That's been my observation.
Thank you for that. Philip Rice of Lloyd's Register, an excellent jumping off point to a discussion on what needs to happen next. International cooperation, some form of legislative structure and framework, and a framework of standards that either set a basic level or something more aspirational to which we aspire.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think Mr. Wang sort of, very eloquently stole my thunder, a few moments ago.
Lightning does strike twice. That's fine.
Because he very eloquently listed 4 things that need to be done, and I think those 4 things align very closely with the findings of the research report. The research report goes into a lot more detail behind what has been done so far. But the 4 things that he spoke about were the introduction of standards, and those standards need to be international standards in their nature. And so there's a real opportunity there for working across governments. There needs to be better cooperation. And so that cooperation really requires the involvement not only of governments but of industry, of research, of the different parties that that actually have an interest in the risk that's created. There needs to be better sharing of data, and in some industries we are starting to see that. So in the shipping industry, which is one that we have quite a lot of knowledge of on one side of our business, there is an initiative where information about any cyber attack that takes place onto a shipping company is sent to an independent party. That data is cleaned, it's separated out so that it's not identifiable in terms of who was the attack was actually executed against, and then shared amongst various shipping companies so that they can think about how they respond to those types of things. And then the fourth point that Mr. Wang mentioned was about skills and developing the skills for people to understand what are both the security and the safety risks related to Industry 4.0.
Skills I will come back to in a moment or two, but just on this question of standards and setting standards, standards of course first have to be evaluated and determined, and that process sometimes takes an extraordinary amount of time. That needs to speed up.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if we just take an example, one of the most recent examples in the International Standards Organization was the move from 18,000 to 45,000, which was the new occupational health and safety standard that has been released last year. That journey took 5 years. So for the International Standards Organization to convene, to create, to debate, to finalize the move from 18,000 to 45,000 took 5 years.
Okay, how do we speed that up?
That's the question that I think we need to be addressing and addressing head on, because it needs to be a national issue. I think standards come to the fore, as I said, at times of crisis and in times of catastrophe when something happens, and actually we can't afford to let those things happen. Where we need to get to through the right forums, and in fact with the involvement of the likes of UNIDO, who's obviously a founding member of GMIS, is accelerating that process.
But standards already exist. Some of these issues that we are discussing today are as old as industry itself. Why do we not simply take the standards that were designed for a physical, isolated factory and simply replicate them across?
So I think you will always be able to learn from previous standards, and if you take something like additive manufacturing, so 3D printing, which is one of the technologies that sits within the sort of bundle of Fourth Industrial Revolution technologies, the standards can be applied in part, but they are not comprehensive enough to understand some of the new implications. So if you look at additive manufacturing processes, you need standards that are going to regulate the quality of powders. You need standards that are going to regulate whether the powders that are being used are safe in working environments. You need standards that apply to the fabrication facilities, the atmospheric conditions, humidity conditions, all of these types of things in those fabrication facilities. You need standards for post-processing activities, because if you're providing a pressure treatment or a heat treatment to something, it can affect its physical properties. And then you need standards that are going to be applied for to the actual finished product. So while we have standards for manufacturing, traditional manufacturing techniques, the integration of all of those different parts into new standards for additive manufacturing, let's say, doesn't yet exist. And there's also, in additive manufacturing, a question about data. So when you 3D print something, some of that is defined, or the quality of the final product is defined by the data that is being provided to the printer, and that in itself is vulnerable to change or to integrity issues. So that's what we need to look at, is standards for the new technology that we are currently having to adopt.
Thank you, David. Standards, of course, set the letter of the law. What also matters is the spirit, is the culture within organizations to make it more aware of the safety and the security issues, to identify the risks proactively, and then to do something about it before it becomes an expensive crisis. How do we build that culture?
Well, particularly in terms of cybersecurity, for example, I think something that we see that might happen is that insurance companies can drive this change in culture. So insurance companies are acquiring more cybersecurity expertise, and they will start going to manufacturing firms and asking for more detailed cybersecurity minimum requirements. And when companies are faced with this situation where they cannot claim insurance for potential vulnerabilities, that will start driving a change, or I hope so at least. It's difficult, the truth is that it's difficult. Safety culture, I think, is, has always, occupational health and safety has come a long way in manufacturing. We remember the first industrial revolution to now. People almost no longer die in factories around the world. So that is a very well-developed area. I think the safety culture, I would say in most manufacturing or advanced manufacturing companies and plants is very well established, and it will continue to be. It's just a matter of understanding what the new emerging risks are and how can we address this. That's why these things are all interrelated. We need foresight studies to understand how this is going to play out, but all these foresight exercises are going to inform our research and development needs, and this is going to inform the development of our standards. And then we need the skills to implement the standards. So what is complicated about standards is that usually you have a community of people working on safety standards with a particular expertise, and a community of people working on cybersecurity standards with a completely different expertise. It is the overlap, as we say now, because these two communities need to start talking to each other. They need to start collaborating. You need to introduce more cybersecurity concepts into safety. You need to introduce more safety concepts into cybersecurity, and that is the challenge, where working groups, such as the one proposed by GMIS, could have an impact.
Mr. Suvorov, you agree that we need more collaboration, that we need to talk to each other more?
Yes, completely agree. Being professional in IT area and cybersecurity, 3 years ago I jumped into conversation with one of world leading insurance brokerage company discussing new type of insurance contracts, because for that time it still be unresolved for many companies. Any possible machinery breakdown or unplanned outage which were caused by computer or software were outside of traditional insurance contract. So we checked many underwriting reports. We saw many interesting type of risks they are trying to assess, like exposure that helicopter will fall down, but nobody put specific part of the document with possible risk that someone will harm by incident or unintended attempt from computer. So now we see, I know a couple of positive examples when insurance companies provide such type of insurance contract. Yes, I agree. And of course, we, in this case and in many other cases, we rely on human behavior, on human mistakes. If I may, I would share a short, interesting story to increase level of security for all of you. It happened in 2015. Kaspersky team discovered this targeted attack with name of dark hotel. So you may check dark hotel in the internet. And it happened because they compromised couple of network equipment in a set of luxury hotels. And they're waiting for particular top managers of some Asian corporations. Because when you are in the hotel and when you are checking into your Wi-Fi network, you put always your last name, like Suvorov, and your room number. Bingo. They identified a couple of people, and after this login with the compromised network equipment, they provide some faked page with the logo of the hotel and with request, dear Mr. or Mrs., you have to download update to have a successful connection. So my advice, and please use it in your daily base, if you are in the hotel and if you are connecting with a starting page, and if someone asks you to download something, even with logo of the hotel, stop it, call to the reception, and check if it's real download from the hotel. At least you will be more secure.
I wish you had told us that when we all arrived for this summit and checked into our hotels. It may be...
Yeah, it starts always from social engineering, from some behavior.
And just addressing Philip and David's point about the importance of skills in your area of expertise in cybersecurity.
Yes, we see a new trend that companies cannot anymore hire high professionals in cybersecurity area. The complexity of the technologies, the complexity of threat model aspects require combination between own employees and some specialized outsourcing companies. Otherwise, it can be always lack of expertise on the area of the customer side. Moreover, it's not only about cybersecurity skills. It's a general challenge for all of us who are big fans and who are business people for industrial revolution. I am a member of World Manufacturing Forum, and the title of this year's report is a skill for manufacturing challenge. So it's a big gap between maturity of technologies and maturity of possible use cases and people who can implement and maintain and after in a productive mode. So it's a big challenge, it's a big problem. I don't think robots and cobots will substitute us in the nearest future to implement this complexity. So we have to think how to reduce the gap.
Okay, thank you so much. David and Philip, I'm going to ask you to wrap up this discussion on certainly cybersecurity, which we've discussed a lot, but also physical safety, which is the other important element of the work that is being done by the GMIS working group. Give us a few thoughts on what we should do next. What should the companies in the room think about when they go back to their businesses at the conclusion of this summit?
So I think, without over-promoting the research that has been done, I think pick up a copy of the report. It would be a very good starting point. There are some very interesting stories in there about where things have happened to date that we should be concerned about. There is also a list in the report that goes through all of the standards that we are aware of so far and all of the initiatives that we're aware of that have been undertaken, and that will probably give people the ability to then go and look in more detail at those. But I think the overall takeaway is probably to recognize that as industries one of the overarching mantras, if I can put it that way, of the all of the occupational health and safety bodies around the world, is that you are responsible for the risks that you create, and you're responsible for mitigating those risks. So it's not that you can look at this as being somebody else's issue, something that you can wait to try and address. If you are adopting these types of technologies, then you need to recognize that that you have an obligation to inform yourself, to make sure that your teams are informed about those risks. And I think there have been some very interesting incidents on the cyber security insurance side of things recently, where people have actually found out that they are not covered through through insurance, and that has come as a huge surprise to them. And there are a number of quite interesting court cases on that are underway at the moment. So I think that's the my closing point is that as businesses, you are responsible for for the risks that you create, and therefore you need to take accountability for for understanding those.
Thank you, David. Concluding thought.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely agree about having a look at the report. I think at a very basic level, companies need more information. There are a few self-assessment tools that they can access, provided by different initiatives in different countries. I think companies should do at a very basic level a self-assessment of their cybersecurity risk situation. In terms of safety, if they are thinking already of introducing new technologies, something that we have been proposing is that we have talked about how standards are very slow, but there are examples of best practices out there, and companies can get together to develop guidelines that are more quickly produced than standards that could potentially represent a foundation or a baseline for a future standard development. So I think basically trying to work together to develop these guidelines, go and find self-assessment tools, information. That's as a basic, I think those are basic steps that could be taken.
Thank you very much. Always good to have a practical end, a functional end to all of our discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our panel, David Lale, Andrei Suvorov, Philip Rice, and Wang Xisong. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you for your attention. Just a note to say that we will resume tomorrow with a workshop at 9:30 a.m. on improving supply chains. That's in Hall D for those of you who are interested. For everyone at the summit, we will resume our plenary sessions all together in this hall at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. Thank you very much.